So Inter Milan reduced, they were not actually reduced to a man down, but then they had their head coach sent off for, complaining. It was wild scenes at the Giuseppe Meazza. Every Inter Milan fan was thinking, see, Inter were just going to hold on tight, at least with that lead, that 2-1 lead, whilst Napoli were also being frustrated by Parma, somewhere else. Then guess what happens again? In the 90th minute, a penalty was awarded to Lazio, but then Napoli were also being frustrated by Parma. So Napoli returned back to the summit after Inter, relinquished their 2-1 lead to Lazio. Then in the 90 plus 1 minute in that game between Parma and Napoli, Antonio Conte also gets himself sent off. So just a point separated the first two teams in the Italian Serie A heading into the penultimate round of games. So Matchday 37 saw Inter Milan host Lazio, in the Italian Serie A. They are still chasing for the Scudetto. And then Napoli also had to travel all the way to Parma to at least also play, hoping that they could secure a win, then win their last game of the season. Then they could be crowned champions in the Italian Serie A for the second time in just 3 seasons. Now, interesting things that did happen in both games simultaneously. Like I said, it was just 1 point. Napoli leading Inter by just a point, and it was everything you could ever talk of as far as 2 games being played concurrently is concerned. Now let's walk through what happened throughout the game and how the games ended in stalemate, which means that it would take until match week 38, the last game of the season, to decide who the champion of the Italian Serie A is going to be. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and then also hit on the like button. Turn on the notification button as well so that you could stay up to date with all the latest from the world of sport from our media. Now let's continue. So Inter were at the Giuseppe Meazza. They were hosting Lazio, and then Napoli were also playing against Parma. So this was a game where we saw Inter move to the top of the Serie A table a couple of times, even when the game hasn't ended. So at halftime, Inter Milan were 1-0 up against Lazio, when Parma were also holding Napoli to a goalless draw. So at halftime in both games, we saw Inter leading the table, and all they had to do was to see through the end of the game to at least, retain top spot and then win their last game of the season against Como. Then Inter Milan would have been crowned champions of the Scudetto. Now, interestingly, quite a number of talking points, quite a number of incidents, dramatic incidents happening in both games. Now, in the 72nd minute, in that game between Inter Milan and Lazio equalized through Pedro. So it meant that Inter were not top of the table anymore, but then they had fallen behind Napoli, who at that time were also drawing against Parma. Then guess what happened? In the 80th minute, Inter takes the lead again. So Inter leapfrog Napoli into top place again. When Napoli were still drawing at Parma, Inter took a 2-1 win over Lazio. So Inter only had 10 minutes to hold on to the lead. 10 minutes to hold on to the lead, at least, to be top of the table heading into match day 38 of the Italian Serie A. Now, interesting scenes about to unfold. After Inter took the lead by 2-1 in the 80th minute. Around that time, Napoli were also drawing goalless. They were drawing in a goalless stalemate against Parma. Then guess what happened? In the 88th minute, Simone Inzaghi, who is the head coach for Inter, gets himself sent off for, overly questioning the decisions of the referee. So Inter Milan reduced, they were not actually reduced to a man down, but then they had their head coach sent off for, complaining. It was wild scenes at the Giuseppe Meazza. Every Inter Milan fan was thinking, see, Inter were just going to hold on tight, at least with that lead, that 2-1 lead, whilst Napoli were also being frustrated by Parma, somewhere else. Then guess what happens again? In the 90th minute, a penalty was awarded to Lazio. Interesting scene. So after Inter gets their head coach or manager sent off, 2 minutes later, Lazio were awarded a penalty. And then steps up Pedro for a brace. He converts. So it's back to Inter drawing 2-2 with Lazio. But then Napoli were also being frustrated by Parma. So Napoli returned back to the summit after Inter, relinquished their 2-1 lead to Lazio. Then in the 90 plus 1 minute in that game between Parma and Napoli, Antonio Conte also gets himself sent off. So it's not only Simone Inzaghi who gets himself sent off, but then Antonio Conte was also given the marching orders for excessively, complaining. And it was, trust me, it was a tiring night. It was a frustrating night for both coaches because both coaches are winners. Both coaches wanted to win. And you can just imagine Simone Inzaghi and then Antonio Conte on the touchlines. You can just imagine how wild the scenes were. So Antonio Conte gets himself sent off. Then guess what happened? Whilst Inter Milan were drawing 2-2 against Lazio, it was so frustrating for their fans to even watch. Their fans had their phones checking what was happening in that game between Parma and Napoli. In the 90 plus 6 minutes or 6 minutes of added time in that game between Parma and Napoli, Napoli gets a penalty. They awarded a penalty. So it's all about to get even more interesting because after Antonio Conte gets himself sent off, the players try to win themselves a penalty, which is cool. So if you're thinking, see, Napoli are going to take the lead and that would have been it. Because if Napoli had won that game and Inter had drawn, that means that Napoli would have opened up a 3-point gap between themselves and their title challengers. So that means that all they would have wanted or needed on the last day would have been a draw to be crowned champions. But guess what happens? After several minutes of consultation, the referee decides to overturn the penalty because he felt that there wasn't enough in it to award Napoli a penalty. So Napoli's penalty that was awarded to them in the 6 minutes of injury time was then cancelled. So it meant that Napoli were still drawing at Parma. How frustrating can it get for Napoli fans and even the players? But then it gets even more intense when in the 9th minute of added time in that game between Lazio and then also Inter Milan, there was a goal being scored by Inter Milan. But unfortunately, the goal was also chalked off after further consultations with the VAR. The referee decided to chalk off the goal. So, see, wild scenes in both stadiums. Parma hosting Napoli and then also Inter Milan hosting Lazio, where we saw the teams, trade places at the top of the table throughout the 90-minute span of that game. We saw the league change hands a couple of times, about 10 times when both teams could be at the top and then the next minute they are down. Then guess what happened? In the 10th minute of added on time, Napoli after the referee. So the referee took 4 minutes to confer with the VAR officials and the machine and come to a conclusion that Napoli didn't deserve the penalty. So Inter were being frustrated at home by Lazio. And again, you were thinking that they could have won because they took the lead twice and relinquished it twice. And even to make matters worse, they took the lead again in the 9th minute of added time. But then unfortunately, that goal was chalked off. Napoli themselves also got a chance. And see, watching both games was quite so interesting and so every word that you would want to describe this it was breathtaking, epic, because you could see both teams getting frustrated, both coaches getting themselves sent off, and then you have this both set of fans staying glued to their phones whilst watching this game. They were also watching out for the other results from the other game. We saw a similar thing happen in the Eredivisie where Ajax were held to a draw, or they lost at home, and then we saw PSV win. Then on the last day, PSV were drawing and Ajax were winning. You were thinking that PSV were going to be crowned champions in the Eredivisie, but unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. But then you talk about football heritage, you talk about everything you'd ever want to see in a football match between two sides fighting for a single trophy, and that was what we witnessed in the title race in Italy, when Napoli narrowly escaped a scare because Lazio did them a favor. Perhaps Inter will be saying that Parma also did us a favor, but then it's all to play for on the last day of the season, Matchday 38 in the Italian Serie A.